Good evening, everyone. My deepest apologies for this difficult start. Another example of what 2020 has to offer. We're very sorry to have to ask you to return to the page and click on the newest link, as the previous link ended up getting corrupted. But thankfully, with our communication through the text message that I was able to send, it does appear now that we have north of 250 of you who have already switched over. So thank you for your patience. And I'll wait a few moments prior to getting into the actual presentation. Does play to some of the complexities and difficulties we do have in all of these times and what it is we're facing in terms of the challenge. One of the reasons I do have my team here, Mr. Spence, Assistant Superintendent for Instruction, is here, Ms. Lavelle, Assistant Superintendent for Human Resources, Mr. Harrington, Assistant Superintendent for Business, Andrew Choi, our Director of Technology, is here, and Erin DeFilia, our Principal of Charles Campaign, is here as well. We have had a tremendous amount of hard work over the last number of months in preparation for our return to school this fall. And I do want to thank our team here for being working, throughout days, nights, weekends to be prepared for this possibility. So as I give a few more moments to get started, you'll note, my distance from the screen as opposed to doing it in front of a laptop on my own. Mostly that's to hide all the gray that has been added to my beard over the last 4 months. Ms. DeFilia pointed that out earlier. So I'm happy to say that I'm doing it from much further distance so you don't notice as much. But we do have a lot of important information to share with you this evening. This is going to be, again, the first of our 3 presentations. The presentations are designed based on the feedback we received from the community, which was extensive, and I'm grateful for it. So at this time, what I'd like to do is we're going to switch our screen to my presentation, and what I'll ask you all to do is try to note the numerous questions that were sent in, a few hundred emails. Some emails had 1 question, some had 4, some had as many as 25 or 30. And we did take the time with our team of all of our building principals, our assistant superintendents, and myself to go through all of the questions between the time in which we began this Thursday afternoon through today to ensure that this presentation answers as many of them as possible. And what we'd ask you to do is, along the way, in the section of which you in particular had paid attention to in your questioning, if you do have further questions as I move on, please post them at our returntoschool@bethpage.ws email address. And Mr. Spence, Mr. Choi, Mr. Harrington will be monitoring that. And either along the way or surely at the end of the presentation, we will make time for questions to be answered. So I appreciate your patience and understanding. So again, tonight is the first of our parent forums. We do have 3 on the schedule, one tomorrow at 1 o'clock and Wednesday at 5 o'clock, purposefully to have different times to allow people with their busy schedules and work schedules and children's schedules to try to find time to attend at least one. Purpose of all of this is to provide a health and safety environment to our students and staff above all else. We know that during the time that we were closed, the 3 long months in the spring, it was a very challenging time. Clearly the most challenging time in the history of education over the last 100 years or more. And now, of course, we have a greater challenge ahead of us, which is how to attempt the 2021 school year for 10 months in the best possible environment to meet the needs of our students while keeping the most healthy and safe environment for both students and staff alike. This was many months of collaboration with numerous stakeholders and an establishment of our goals both academically and especially socially and emotionally, as so many students and staff and community members have struggled with the conditions of which we've lived for these past number of months. So to begin, I do want to say a very big thank you to our Return to School Advisory Committee, made up of our Board of Education with constant communication between all of us and them, our district administration, the Bethpage Congress of Teachers, Bethpage Teacher Assistants, our PTA Council, who I meet with regularly, weekly or bi-weekly at least, to stay in touch with, to understand what's going on in our community, the clerical and custodial units. Our medical advice came from the Chief of Pediatric Intensive Care Unit at Cohen's Children's Medical Center at Northwell Health Systems, and then all of you, the many of you, who thankfully took the time to provide information to our parent survey in understanding how you feel about this very difficult challenge ahead of us. So let me share some of that information. In a district with just under 3,000 students, we had 1,805 participants representing over 2,300 students, since you were able to fill one survey for multiple children in your household. And you see the distribution of how many were represented across the buildings, which is a wonderful representation of our school community. The bigger ticket items, such as how comfortable you are sending your children to the school this fall with the health and safety measures recommended in place, and you see an overwhelming propensity for those that feel moderately to very comfortable sending them to school. A similar question about if our school buildings were to reopen, do you plan to send your children for in-person learning? Without any specifics of that, again, a large portion of our community was feeling comfortable with that. We all know that masks are a reality. Whether you're out to a restaurant, to the store, working in small groups or larger groups, and we wanted to know if wearing masks was a requirement, will we be able to have people feeling comfortable sending their children with wearing masks? And then we know that transportation has been described as a very large concern, being that social distancing itself is just not practical on any bus that normally can carry up to 60 students, and now we would be forced to having students on a bus with far reduced numbers, but of course to wear a mask helps mitigate some of that. So as we dig into this presentation to provide you more information with specifics, helping you understand what we are all up against, health and safety of all students, staff, and community members is of the utmost importance. And that is why it is, of course, bolded. And if we have that in place, we do want to maximize access to our top-level educational experience, make sure that whatever safety practices are in place are with best practices and up to date, work to meet the needs academically, socially, emotionally, and also, again, remember that this challenge ahead of us, it was only 3 months, once again, in the spring, and we have to try to find a way to be prepared for an entire school year. And we can't imagine that any one plan is going to be the only solution during the course of that year. So it was vital that we come up with very predictable and sustainable plans that can be managed and transition between very quickly, very smoothly, especially for the sake, again, of the students, where disruption is such a key component to their academic success or failure. So as a reminder, we know that in the middle of July, the governor gave us more guidance about reopening schools. and that if we maintain phase 4 of reopening with an infection rate below 5%, using the 14-day average, we would likely be able to reopen. Schools will close. The buildings will close, not the schools though. The buildings will close if the regional infection rate rises above 9% using the 7-day average. As a benchmark, I believe in the last few days, Long Island as a region has an infection rate of less than 1% of those being tested. And we do have strong support for the American Academy of Pediatrics and the CDC to consider school being reopened with students physically present if those infection rates are incredibly low and if we can maintain every possible precaution. So with all of that in line, New York State has indicated that schools can open. But once again, that's as of today. It is imperative that we are prepared to make adjustments on any given day as circumstances change, as recommendations have changed from the beginning of the guidance in the middle of July to today on many occasions. And having to be able to make those changes in a district of this size with as many moving parts requires a tremendous amount of coordination. So as I've made you aware, at this time, Bethpage schools will be open K-12 with our all-in-person plan. And what does that mean? In-person plans were intended to be, again, 5 days a week, Monday through Friday. But we, of course, have a number of important safety measures in place, where each classroom is maintaining social distancing and barriers. And if all students were to attend, and we had 100% attendance every day, there may be the need for a few students in some grade levels in the elementary schools and in some classes or courses in the secondary schools to occasionally rotate out to an additional instructional space, also maintaining all of the safety measures, managed by licensed teachers, done so as little as possible to allow all of our students to return. All students and staff are required to wear masks. Mask breaks, though, will be provided regularly, and we'll provide you more information shortly. Cohorts are going to be placed in grades K-6 to reduce mixing of students. And what we've done in order to make this happen is use additional or alternate spaces for instruction. And that's generally where we take courses with larger numbers and move them to classroom spaces or other spaces that are going to be used as classrooms that can accommodate more seats. All of our classrooms have a particular capacity where each student will be maintaining 6 foot of distance between themselves and other students in all directions. Of course, that's because you have different sized classrooms all over our schools. And so the building principals, our directors, a number of our other staff worked together to determine what is the actual capacity of all of our space. And then with our scheduling of our classes in every level, we then work backwards to make certain changes to typical classrooms to accommodate those larger groups, all while maintaining social distancing at all times. The most important safety protocol to maintain health is social distancing. And we're required to provide either social distancing or barriers or masks. It is incredibly important to note that in Bethpage, we will be providing all three in all instructional spaces. That is not something that is easily accomplished, but for those who are from Bethpage, many of you are, you know that at times in the past, the high school and the middle school had many more students in their enrollment than they do now. And so those spaces were much tighter in the past. Even the time at which I was principal at JFK, there are now 100 students less than there were then. We're fortunate to have very positive lower class size in our enrollment and class size planning, and that allowed us to look at this carefully and be able to provide social distancing, again, in all instructional spaces. How is that different from the hybrid plan, where students would come in, only half of them? The reality is that there is no difference, because in classrooms you'd still all have social distancing and barriers and masks. The only significant place of concern in the difference between a hybrid every other day type plan or everyone attending all 5 days a week in the secondary schools would be passing in the hallways. And we have items to address with you here shortly. So what do our classrooms look like? I have some photos here from staged classrooms in some of our buildings. And the big difference here is you'll notice, if you are in our classrooms, especially elementary, that there are no longer some of those items that we do like to make our classrooms more warm of an environment, such as carpeting and chairs for reading centers and other larger tables for small group instruction. Those have all been removed in order to accommodate more students in person. Next is a sample of, again, social distancing, but also with our barriers. And what you'll find is that you'll see the black lines a little bit. The good news is they're hard to see, meaning the barriers themselves are not very oppressive to the environment for our students. And here's another view with the barriers. So our issue with masks is very, very important to everyone. This will help ensure a much safer environment for students and staff, and they're going to be required for everyone and enforced by our code of conduct. The mask exceptions will be on a case-by-case basis with parent connection with their school administrator, based on medical conditions that are described and understood. But we'll surely need them to be in the places where we can have more students gathering. Arrival and dismissal, hallway passing, bathrooms if the bathrooms are not for one person at a time, where we will try to do that, and any common areas. Mask breaks will be instituted, but will always be given at the instruction of the teacher. And that specifically means that the teacher will determine when is the right timing to provide it, when all students are now in the right place, in the right distances, behind their barriers, for example, or, of course, potentially outdoors. And as of today, and again, plans are designed to be fluid as more information becomes available. We do anticipate that when students in the elementary school are in a safe place, behind their barriers and in social distancing in their desks, teachers will be able to institute 2 breaks per hour. Secondary, 1 per period. And the break can be up to 15 minutes due to the contact tracing that are part of the CDC and Department of Health standards, which I'll explain a little further in a little bit. As I've mentioned previously, all students and staff will be required to complete a daily health questionnaire at home where your temperature will be taken, and no student with a temperature of greater than 100.0 will be permitted in school, or staff for that matter. The questionnaire, as of today, will need to be completed daily, and building administration will work on making sure that all have completed it, and for those that have not, track down students as soon as possible to ensure that they are indeed safe to be in school. I say there the final version is not yet determined, as there are numerous third parties that are attempting to create a more user-friendly app only associated with your student's name, building, grade level, and email, your email address, that allows you to fill out that information on a smartphone more easily than having to do it more of a computer-based, like a typical form. The guidance strongly suggests from the Department of Health that all temperatures should be taken at home to reduce the larger gatherings as you enter a building at arrival. So at the moment, that is where we are in our daily health screenings, unless we are able to confidently find ways in which to screen students' temperatures upon arrival. If there is a way in which to safely and quickly do that, that doesn't have a bottlenecking of students upon entering the buildings, we would absolutely look to shift if we can. Again, part of what is ongoing about this entire planning process. In our grades K to 6, students will be cohorted or grouped together without changing classes or traveling to classes as a group. To help you understand our need for small group instructional rooms, as some were calling the overflow of what is the full capacity of the room with social distancing, is again when 100% of our students are present. So this is prior to the parent survey that we began last Thursday for those who were choosing the virtual option. Those were the grades. So you're very clear as to who was going to need to have students occasionally go in a small group, and it would be the same small group each time on occasional basis to an additional instructional area, having their lessons supplied there by licensed teachers, having specials potentially go through that schedule as well. And those were the grades that we were in need of, again, if 100% were in attendance at the 3 buildings. The teachers will travel to the classrooms. However, we do have students who do need additional attention for certain services. Those students will travel to their small group or individual instructional area. Music which we'll talk about a little more shortly, will be coming to the classrooms, but lessons will still be pulled out where they go into their small groups. But these small groups are in larger spaces where the students are going to need to be 12 feet apart, especially in band, to play an instrument, 6 in orchestra. So again, all of these plans include each of our spaces maintaining socially distanced at all times, with barriers and with masks. 7 to 12 is very different to provide the type of instruction that is required in the program. And so much of what is important in their lives is the opportunity to have not only their normal schooling, but the choices that they make that lead them to some of the rigorous programs that they attempt during the course of their secondary school career. We will be following a regular 9-period day, 6 to 12, but in grades 7 to 12, they will be the ones traveling to classes. Having the 6th grade already stationed in one area and not moving has already reduced the hallway congestion. And the principals have been working with colleagues near and far to determine what are the best ways in which to reduce congestion in the hallways. Directional lines, only certain staircases being up and others down. Masks must be worn to change classes, and a tremendous amount of reminders in all of the signage. With that, no hallway lockers will be in use at all until further notice. And as we get closer to school and our teaching staff continues to work on ways in which instruction is going to take place in their classrooms, we'll provide you a little more specifics about what type of materials your children would expect to bring with them each and every day. We know transportation is a key component to having our students in school. We are currently working with our buses to be routed to a reduced capacity. Again, our transportation survey is out to you in the public. As I showed earlier in our parent survey, how many of you have indicated that you will not be sending your children on the bus, and how many of you were able to find your own transportation. And we're grateful for that and appreciate your help in making sure that the students can arrive without needing the bus. Of course, though, all students will be required to wear a face covering, a mask, other appropriate face coverings on the bus. And for any student who is identified as medically unable to, we will work separately with them, those families, to try to make sure they are routed on a bus where all students are socially distant. Since socially distancing students on a bus, again, reduces capacity and would have to quadruple the number of bus runs to equate to our normal capacity. Not something that's sustainable. Every bus will be sanitized thoroughly between the morning and afternoon route. Again, all of these slides have been built on the questions of which you asked. There will always be a few questions that were either very specific to a need for your child that may not be applicable to a forum like this. And I do encourage you at the end of this presentation and over the next few days that if you realize it is very specific to your child, reach out to your child's principal who can start that conversation if there were any specifics that they can share with you in their plan. Arrival and dismissal times. It is something that is still ongoing to determine the exact nature of what's going to be best. And so many of these plans now coming forward from here are going to be dependent on how many students are going to be in school in person. So that is another component of which will change dramatically as parents choose our all virtual option. So as an example, as of today, with all the students present, JFK would likely be using a schedule as depicted on the slide, where each grade has a 15-minute time slot and their own door entrances. But we recognize that that's not going to be perfect for everyone. And there may be those that need to drop off early, and those that have siblings, of course, in 2 grades. We just hope that we can get as much cooperation from all of you as possible, as you have always been so cooperative through all of this, to help stagger arrivals and dismissals as the principals do everything they can to reduce congestion during certain times of both parts of the day. We know there are lots of questions about lunch. To start the school year, K to 6 will all be eating inside their classrooms. Mr. Harrington and our partner with the food services at Aramark are developing plans in which you as parents can pre-select from a set of menus consisting of all prepackaged meal options. And that will allow our principals to help organize the lunch service and bring the lunches to those that are participating each day. 3/4 of you in our parent survey indicated that you would sometimes or always utilize the lunch service that we have available. 7 to 12 will be providing additional spaces beyond the cafeterias to help have students eat in a socially distanced place. Since during the time while you are eating, you are not required to wear a mask, but you are required to keep social distancing intact. In order to do that without students, again, congregating in larger groups, Mr. Harrington's arranging for our service carts to be available at all our different eating areas to reduce any waiting on lines. And because the selections are going to be predetermined and all meals will be prepackaged, this should actually allow for a very, very, very quick grab-and-go scenario where students get their lunch and are able to be seated at their locations very safely. Recess is going to be very important for all of our students, K to 8, since I know it's also JFK students who enjoy getting outside. And we are going to be encouraging all of our buildings to get outside as often as possible. This would also include, by the way, the use of the outside for teaching staff to bring their classes as much as possible. We know that their PE teachers will be assisting as the entire physical education profession is working together to develop a variety of outdoor activities that will be deemed safe and enjoyable, so that we try to encourage students to be outside, to be active, as we know how difficult it can be. And you may see that on numerous occasions in addition to lunch. We are looking at the possibility of adding tents so that on the occasions where sun or rain is there, we can still get students outdoors. There is a significant issue with tents regarding building permits and rules that regulate them in the state of New York for safety codes. And so there are limits to the size of which the tents can be erected without those. And Mr. Harrington is working on that right now. We will likely be able to secure a number of these tents outside each building. The principals are working on those areas to help make it where students again can find some time outside. We know how important cleaning and disinfecting is, and the district is going to follow all the protocols and procedures in the guidance for dealing with COVID-19. We utilize a product called Virex. That is the standard for schools. It meets the EPA's criteria against this virus. In addition, the Board of Education has allowed us to hire an additional cleaning staff per building. And we are also securing an additional sets of equipment that help allow our cleaning practices to be even more widespread, efficient, and effective together. And then hand sanitizing is going to be a key component here. We have hand sanitizer stations installed in every classroom and will be added, and if not already, in many of our high traffic areas, so that students, through the time in which when we return to school, will be spending a lot of time with our staff learning the proper quantity, times, ways in which to have hand hygiene be a key component, which is still actually the greatest recommendation out there for our students. Daily, you'll have bathrooms that are cleaned frequently throughout the day. I don't give a number on the frequently because it will surely depend on the frequency of visits. In many bathrooms, we will limit it to one student at a time, but in all bathrooms, we will be monitoring with an adult who will contain a log of visits that will be tracked each day. During passing, all bathrooms will be closed at the middle school and high school in order to maintain knowing where all of our children are and intend to be. At lunch, we'll make sure to clean in those shared spaces. And throughout the day, all of our staff will be continuously cleaning our high-touch areas, door handles, handrails, nurses' offices, for example. Every building, every classroom will have a thorough cleaning each and every evening, in all of our shared spaces as well. Our ventilation system, all of our unit ventilators have been upgraded this summer with filters replaced. That was a great plan that was already in place prior to COVID as part of our energy efficiency upgrade. And so thankfully that was already in the works and able to be accomplished smoothly. We know that fresh air is the greatest asset, so windows and doors will remain open throughout the school day. Again, I understand that there are concerns and questions regarding the winter season as we get there. At this time, as mentioned, we will keep evaluating how things are working and determine next steps. But we know that for, again, the start of school, that will be our plan. As you know, we do have a number of classrooms that do have an air conditioning unit, and all air conditioning units are associated with a medical issue for a student or staff member. And the recommendation by the CDC is that they should be used in those cases. And so we, of course, allow the teacher, depending on the weather, to make that judgment, and depending on the medical plan, if it is associated, again, with the student. As of right now, the CDC recommends that fans are not to be used for circulating air around the room. If anyone were to have a fan, it would be to point it to themselves, not to circulate air. And our air filtration systems, again, our unit ventilators, will maximize outside fresh air intake. And that will include prior to arrival and after departure in every location. I do see a question that popped up. Mr. Spence, Mr. Harrington, and Mr. Choi are trying to help me secure some of your questions that are being added as I'm presenting. And the barrier is a 3-sided barrier. As someone mentioned, I know it's harder to see, again, because that's a good news, because that's the quality of the product in the pictures. But I will post this presentation at the conclusion and have it available for you to review, as I do believe, again, many of your questions will be found in this document, I hope. Not all, but I surely hope many. And including those photos of the rooms that I've had staged and posted for you. And so if you can see them with the black lines at the I have one behind me here, the black area at the hinge area, that lets you know that it's 3-sided. So what is contact tracing rules going to look like? This is a huge issue that is only newly still being determined. But according to the CDC, a close contact is defined within 6 feet of a positive case for more than 15 minutes. And making sure that positive case was within 48 hours of symptoms occurring. Or if you took care of someone with a positive case, or direct touching people with positive cases, sharing food with a person with a positive case, or being exposed to their sneezing, coughing, or talking. And that's very important to note as part of our plan. So how are we going to deal with any sort of concerns about symptoms and positive cases? And please note that this is one of the main components of why we do know and believe that students with masks, with already reduced capacities in our buildings, with very good directions being given in terms of the flow of traffic in our hallways, can pass from class to class safely, being that, again, close contact is being defined as being exposed to somebody for 15 minutes or more. And so that gives us a lot of confidence in our plan to provide a safer environment that allows us to bring our students in. All the contact tracing requirements, of course, come from the CDC and the New York State Department of Health. Today, as a matter of fact, all of our school nurses were trained in the Johns Hopkins contact tracing protocols. And while that's not a requirement at all for school districts, we felt it important to have that in place. We also know a number of our administrators will be planning to follow as well for that training. We are dealing with the nurses in their expertise and in consultation with the Department of Health to develop our protocols to help all of our staff identify COVID-related symptoms and what are those processes going to be like in each building. And those building plans, with a lot of the details that are more specific to building and building, and it would be hard for me to describe here for you tonight, are going to be posted by tomorrow afternoon so that you can see what your building principal's specific plans are as of now for our students who will be attending all in-person school. We also know there's a lot of training that is required to conduct all of this, and nurses are helping create these themselves, being that they're familiar faces to our students, our staff, and we believe will be more beneficial in the training. So those that are being deemed in close contact, as we described, within 6 feet for an extended period of time, touched, sneezed on, coughed on, they'll be required to be quarantined according to New York State. And Nassau County will be the one in their Department of Health that will be monitoring that. In some cases, if they require us, we'd be in the need to notify other students and staff who may not be close contacts but may have been in the vicinity. And that is again an evolving issue on how to best handle that, and would be done in consultation again with the Department of Health. So this isn't an area where I have black and white answer for you at the moment. Well, let me take you through a couple of scenarios based again on the questions that were asked. A confirmed case, if any student or staff, you are going to be at home, and the CDC, Department of Health, or doctor will guide when that medical clearance comes. If we have people with symptoms, and then of course if you have a confirmed case with a symptom, you again will follow the confirmed case. If you have symptoms and you are negative for a test because you have had a test, the recommendation is that with no fever for 24 hours and no symptoms, the student or staff member can come back to school. Again, these are the recommendations that are in place as of now, and always subject to change based on the Department of Health and CDC's guidelines. If you have symptoms but you have not been tested, that student or staff member will be at home for 14 days since the first symptom. And then when you have no fever for 24 hours at the conclusion of that, and no symptoms, you can return to school again after the 14 days. And then if it's confirmed that you have something else, it's not COVID, we would follow normal school policies such as 24 hours without a fever or a particular diagnosis of something that required a doctor's clearance. And we know that's going to be a very potentially busy item for our parents and our students to handle. And so now we go back to the questions of what happens if my one child is positive and the second child, what are they supposed to do? Well, if you have a child that's positive, your other children would be considered close contact. So that child would stay home for 14 days of self-quarantine and then deal with any potential infection outcome. But if the close contact has had no symptoms, it means that anyone else in contact is now a secondary contact. If there's no symptoms or anything confirmed, that student or staff member can remain in school. So again, that's a secondary contact. The person who lives with the person who is sick stays home. The person A who lives with person B who's sick, person A stays home, but those that were in contact with person A alone do not have to stay isolated under these current plans. I know it's a complicated item to follow. And we do have a tracing diagram that will be posted as well very shortly, highlighting a couple of these in a table that are easier to follow than my slide deck. Lots of questions about testing itself and whether we're doing it or not. Bethpage Schools will not be conducting our own testing at all. We would be helping you figure out how to get tested if you need it through the Nassau County Department of Health. Additionally, it's been very strongly recommended that we do not require students or staff to be tested prior to the start of school for two reasons. Number one, if all of us required that, it would be impossible to fulfill. And even if they got close to being able to do so, it's unlikely that it would be legitimate by the time you get tested and get your results back and actually enter school. Because so many people outside of school would be potentially putting themselves in places where the test is no longer valid. So they do not require us, and they're not recommending that we require having students or staff tested prior to the starts of school. Medically fragile students, as indicated in previous communication to all of you, we're surveying parents to determine those who have underlying health conditions or family members whose health may be compromised and who wish to choose a full distance learning experience. Again, as of today, anyone assigned to virtual learning will still be on their teacher's class assigned role and will follow their class via Google Classroom and Google Meet, which in essence is the same as our hybrid plan. So you might think of it as a hybrid plan with a smaller group, some staying every day and some staying at home. And we do ask you to ensure that for our planning purposes, which is vital, that you do complete the survey with your selection by the end of business Wednesday. And here are the key questions that came from this topic. Why do we need to make the kind of commitment we've asked for? And I know the language was strong to say the full year, but then we allow you to, in essence, apply to come back at the end of every marking period. All the plans that have been described to you prior are dependent on numbers of students in the right types of space, numbers of students upon arrival and dismissal, in lunch, in different courses, in how to plan for their academic services. All of that requires us to know who's going to be here. And as you know, under normal circumstances, that's pretty easy. And we have 96% of our students on an average day attend Bethpage schools prior to this pandemic crisis. And so things could be and may be very dramatically different if the numbers change with who's going to be in attendance. So we do need you to understand that if you wish to choose that route of virtual learning, it is going to come with a commitment so that we can at least have time to plan for both in-person and virtual properly. And then if you wish to change, we do want you to look at each marking period as that time frame. Because nobody can build this where it's able to go back and forth between the two environments. Because you could not keep a safe environment, and you in doing so. So again, when coming back in person or moving to all virtual at any time, the real place is to look at each marking period as those times please. So once again, I know many of you are waiting for tonight's presentation. 900 of you watching right now. So if you are thinking about that, please know that we are very committed to making that available, but it is not something that this district or others can have so easily transition between the two. And we hope that you can complete that for us by Wednesday evening. The social and emotional health and wellness is such a key component. That is the great benefit of having students in front of our staff, as the relationships and connections that they build are what really unlocks a child's potential. And again, seeing such difficulties over the course of the spring and only 3 months of our distance learning, and having to imagine what 10 months of a school year is going to look like this coming year. We do believe that if we are able to maintain all of the safety measures, and again, all of them are in place, not just one of them, that having the students in front of our staff is going to allow them to establish those relationships, establish those practices, procedures, foundational skills that they need, with the potential that we will have to go out, not because we want to, but because we're forced to at some point during the school year. And so the teachers are going to be very heavily focused on creating that comfortable environment when we re-enter school, knowing that it's going to be an uncomfortable environment, knowing that students are going to be very concerned, and as are all of you as parents, on what is going to occur. But we have some great foundations in place with all of our social and emotional work, our character education work with our students that the staff have been prepared for, K to 5, 6 to 12 in a variety of ways, and are continuing to work on this throughout the course of the summer in preparation for our return. And so back again to this issue of our parent choices for our virtual or our in-person, plus some of the plans in order to maintain the groups that we're referring to. Please do not be shocked if your teacher of record changes between now and the start of school. That is a possibility for everyone as we determine which groups are going to be at home and which are going to be in person, and whose classrooms are larger and can have a few more students, while others may not. But please note that any student with an IEP or 504 mandate will be fully scheduled with either pull out or push in services as needed. In the secondary school, schedule changes will no longer be honored at this point, as we need to know what we are working with. The only exception being if you do see your child's course selections and something's missing, for example, or there's an obvious error. We cannot at this point work to start changing choices of electives, for example, or levels until we have an opportunity to fully schedule the building. And then once again, IEP and 504 mandates will be fully scheduled as needed. We know that our concerns with our electives and specials are definitely great, and we want to give you more indication. Music is a very tough one, and music programs throughout New York State are going to suffer terribly with some of these plans. We're trying to maintain as much of our music programs as possible, while currently postponing any concert as you would expect during the course of the winter season and holiday season. So in the elementary, of course, the general music classes will continue to push in, and lessons will be in grades 3 to 5 available for the pullout. But until further notice, there's going to be no morning rehearsals at this time. In the secondary school, the 6th grade will be maintained in their cohorts, so all students will get their music appreciation as a push-in, but also will get their instrumental lessons at this time. We are going to attempt in the 7 to 12 to use larger spaces such as the gymnasiums to potentially have larger groups working, but maintaining 12 feet of distance when necessary in our band, for example. But again, all instrumental lessons will continue. This way, your children are going to get the benefit of ongoing instruction and improvement in their musical instruments, though we know that the large gathering, the full concert bands and orchestras and choirs are going to be something that we may not be able to sustain or pull off. Physical education will be outdoors as often as possible. Each building principal does have an alternate location for bad weather conditions, but it is part of our desire to get students up and moving, and again, outdoors as much as possible. No locker rooms will be used, and no one will need to change clothes. On gym days, just make sure you come prepared, and the teachers will work with you to make sure you understand what that means. And again, what type of activities you would expect? Either limited or no equipment. Still working out what those details would be, so I don't have specific answers yet. I believe physical education administrators across Long Island have a large meeting tomorrow to continue this conversation. Art will be K to 6 push in, where the teachers will come to the rooms again in our cohorts. And our 7 to 12 will be typical courses, but adjustments will be made in terms of the working space where students are located at their own workstation. And we will ensure that there are no sharing of supplies in art whatsoever. And I know that was a lot of questions regarding physical education and art and the sharing of equipment. Field trips, sports, and extracurriculars. As I've mentioned earlier, high school athletics is still to be determined, as they had pushed back the start date to September 21st. We, as of now, have had 0 updates from the state of New York, from Long Island or Nassau County. Our own Mr. Franchi is the president of the Nassau County Athletic Directors Association. He has no information. We talk daily, no updates. At the moment, all field trips are postponed. All AIS is on hold. And all of our extracurriculars and clubs, we're going to wait for school to start, since they typically start a few weeks after school anyway, to evaluate our situation, make adjustments where needed, and determine if there are extracurriculars that are able to be undertaken safely and in which type of environment. We had a number of questions regarding our potential gaps in the learning from the spring. The starting point for our elementary, my windows are open of course, is intense teacher collaboration, where our principals have already started those conversations about where in grade 1 did I leave off. So my grade 2, it's inside. My grade 2 teachers are aware of exactly what I was able to accomplish and what I was not. And that it gives those group of teachers in each building an understanding of what needs to be reviewed, what needs to be taught, possibly new or retaught. We do have a number of summer support programs in place, but we understand that it is only for those that wish to be motivated to work on it. And then we are fortunate to have a number of tools at our disposal, and we're working to develop pre-assessments on our K-8 program to determine, so what are some specific regression patterns and what do they look like through NWEA, our Achieve 3000, which we will level set every fall anyway in grades 3 to 8, our Fontes and Pinnell in our reading levels, Writer's Workshop, and ST Math. So we do have good tools available to our staff to help assess where are we in our return to school, what type of learning gaps might there be, and so how we then can attend to them. There were a number of questions on extra help, and the truth is that we are still working on that and are not certain about how to best go about that. And part of the reason is because of our arrival and dismissal programs that are not fully understood as to how they're going to look, as we do want to make sure all students exit the building safely and return home, and this may need a creative solution. So we're working on that. Mr. Spence has worked extensively throughout the spring and summer, and in particular, just to give you a highlight of some coursework that has been developed here in district by himself and our staff members. And so there are a huge majority of our teaching staff who have already attended a number of these items so that they can learn more about how to best adapt to these uncertain times and these new conditions. So I thank Mr. Spence for all those efforts there. Thank you, pal. And then as a reminder, because we were required to put more detail specifically of our distance learning plan, Mr. Spence has posted it to the website. You'll see it there on our Return to School webpage. Distance learning is going to resemble a regular scheduled school day in all of our buildings, where all students will have daily live interactions with their teachers. Period by period attendance is required, including our high school attendance policy, which will be in place. And why would we need distance learning? Of course, if the infection rate in the region goes up and we are forced to close our buildings, all will be sent home. But on a district level, we could have a periodic closing due to contact tracing with a positive case. If a student in a class has been deemed positive, the class will be home. Others in their grade or in their school that have been determined to be in that close contact, that 15 minutes of close contact, would also be asked to be on the 14 days of isolation and be able to transition to distance learning. That's why it's so important for us to know who is in person and who is on distance learning, so that we can track the significant differences there and be prepared again to transition between them. As I've mentioned, again, the governor has asked us to do these parent forums, and we have one again tomorrow at 1 and Wednesday at 5, where I'll be repeating this presentation, taking opportunity for questions, posting the plans. The distance learning plan is already posted. The contact tracing and testing plan is due on the 21st, but we'll have it up there within a day or two. And then meeting again with the staff to make sure they're very clear as to what our plans are, and I've already met with them once last week and will again this week. I do want to ask all of you, though, all 888 people who have clicked on, and I'm sure multiple people watching on one device, we need your help. All of our plans, regardless of which of the three are in place at any time, require all of us pulling together. In any of our plans where students are in person, what happens off-site will have as much impact on our success as what happens on school grounds. Compliance with what's going on in school, hopefully that type of compliance outside of school will give us the opportunity to have our kids in front of us safely without exposing others needlessly for as long as possible, which gives us again a greater chance to succeed during the course of this entire school year. And once again, to remember that things are changing all around us, whether it's recommendations, whether it's conditions, and we have to be ready to transition quickly. And when that occurs, we're going to need you to be ready with us. And we keep our lines of communication open. And I'm grateful that tonight, with the disastrous 15-minute delay I had, and my apologies, the fact that I could get on the text message quickly and get to you while we were sorting out the details is a positive sign in dealing with a minor crisis, especially for me for the moment, of being unable to connect with you as I should have. I hope that's what the 6 thumbs downs are referring to in my YouTube link here. And that's okay. I understand. And it's not without being deserved. So the building principals were all here with all of us, assistant superintendents and myself, all day today, finalizing our details, not only for tonight's presentation, but for their own individualized plans. And those plans are going to have more specific details that you're very interested in for your specific child at your building. And so we do intend to have those posted to the district website by tomorrow afternoon, as we all just ensure the final edits are in place and posting it again on the district website for your viewing pleasure. We do know that we believe we can do this, because this town has done things that others have never dreamed of, because we always look to do things together. And so we do believe we will do it again here in this tremendous challenge. So over my shoulder, I've heard the pinging of a number of questions, and again, Mr. Choi, Mr. Harrington, Mr. Spence have kindly started to put them in a place in which we can try to follow some questions. And again, I'll spend some time going through some of them so that we have an opportunity to review things that may not have been answered during this. And at the conclusion of all of this, tonight's presentation will be available to you on the link that's already posted, so it will stay there. So you can, the recording will be available. I will post this presentation that acts as a bit of an FAQ type in a slide deck, and we're transposing much of this into a separate FAQ that will also be published to the website within a day or two. So going through a bunch of the questions that we have. That's the FAQ question, will be published soon. I will provide ability of barrier. You say I will provide ability of barriers and social distancing, but you don't let us know how. Yes, social distancing is in place because all desks, as I mentioned, have students 6 feet apart on all sides at all times, and the barriers, 3-sided barrier, in front of them on the tabletop. The barriers will be cleaned each day with a specialized equipment called an electrostatic sprayer that allows the Virex to adhere to the barrier better than a typical sprayer would be. Masks will be made available. Which mask do we have, Mr. Harrington? I'm going to lean on my team a little bit here. It's the typical patient mask?
Correct, yep.
Okay, so in terms of surgical grade or not, I'd have to double check. But it is, again, a patient mask that will be part of what will be provided to each of the students or staff if they ask for it. Face shield is not allowed to replace a mask unless we have, again, scenarios where masks are unable to be worn. So if you have questions about those specific things with your child and their health, I think that's one to surely get to your child's principal and to discuss. The buses will be used for high school, middle school, and elementary, since there are different start times, and they are not going to be able to be cleaned in between the runs. Just in the morning to the afternoon. If you have a thermometer issue at home, all I would ask you to do, since we do have the ability to handle a few individual students without trouble is please contact the school that you had a thermometer break, that you don't believe there's a temperature, and all the other indications on your morning health survey are in the right, positive to attend to school. And then we make sure that someone is there to greet your child so that we can ensure that the temperature is definitely taken care of. All air conditioner units for medical reasons have been cleaned and do have new filters. And how often the filters will be cleaned is going to be an as-needed basis by facilities, meaning how often are they on. So it's impossible for me to give you a time frame on that. We are not sanitizing after each class at JFK and the high school. Again, the recommendation by the medical professionals have been that the hand washing is far more imperative than cleaning each surface between each use. And again, some of it is being able to provide that. Disinfecting wipes are simply for every single class, for every single desk to be able to use is simply not available. There you can't find them in that type of quantity. So we may work to make some cleaning supplies available, but we do not, as of today, have disinfecting wipes available to allow desks to be cleaned in between. And that would be the case for all in-person 5 days, or of course, alternating days in our hybrid plans. In all cases, a question here about students traveling to their pull-out locations. All students who need assistance will get it. So if it's a very young student, those things won't change. That's what would have been in under normal circumstances handled, where students will surely be given the opportunity to have the support they need to get where they need to go. Building and moving breaks for kids. Yeah, so I think that goes back to our recess questions. And so the idea is that we are going to work with the teachers to ensure, I don't want to call it recess regularly, but yeah, it might be recess regularly, or going outside for class, or going outside for a walk, and all of the above are on the table. So we'll make sure that we're able to work with the teaching staff and the principals to get students moving as much as possible. The question about, there's a question about windows and doors to remain open. That is referring to the interior doors, yes, to allow the free flow of air through the through the classroom itself, not the exterior doors. So apologies, I'll clarify that for tomorrow. Question about our daily health screenings. Again, much of that information comes to us again from the Department of Health, and we are also recognizing that we do know that health screenings rely on all of you as parents to ensure that you are forthcoming. And that goes for every employee of every place that requires it now, whether you attend, go to Home Depot or the supermarket. Those employees are doing the same thing. So we are making sure that we try not to have a bottlenecking of kids in the arrival time, and that's why we're aiming towards, again, the heavy recommendation of parents completing those at home. What are the reporting notification measures to the community as risks? What are the? I'm sorry, that question. I'm not certain what we're asking. If the question, I believe a question regarding the notification measures in terms of your identification, all of that will be kept to a very small group of administrators and possible staff, and there will be nothing that would be associated with identifying issues other than name, school, grade level, and a parent email. Isolation room information. Okay, good question. Each building has in their plan a location where an isolation room is being monitored by a staff member, and that would be used for those who may have questions on symptoms, or for example, if somebody who, if we were to check a temperature, came up positive. And that way, anybody with a potential COVID-related issue is separated from all those others. As you know, many students attend the nurse's office for, well visits, meaning medications and other things, or a turned ankle. And so we don't want to have those students mixing with potential COVID cases. And so we do have a separate location for that isolation room. Contact tracing is a question about if it's monitored at BOCES. And at the moment, there's no plans for that. The contact tracing should be monitored by Nassau County Department of Health. The question again about the health check. And again, the reason we are looking to, I should have mentioned this earlier. One of the additional reasons to find an app as opposed to just using a typical Google survey form is it will allow those with administrative access to identify those who have not completed it more quickly, as opposed to simply who has completed it. And that's one of the reasons we're trying to get an app that has a little more complexity to the back end, as they say, on the diagnostics that you can pull from it for us. Okay, those were 20 some odd questions on health and safety. We're going to slide over to some questions that they're gathering for me from instructions. Thank you for those questions. I'm sure others will come in, and we'll stay on till at least 9 o'clock for those who wish to keep adding if I don't get to you now. If a child is on quarantine and they're home on distance learning, as of again today, they would stay with their classroom teacher, with the others that are on virtual learning, and simply move from the live in-person to the remote with that same teacher, so there is a continuity of instruction and no loss of progress with that teacher. If a teacher becomes ill, it would be when a teacher becomes ill, we would have to go through the steps of contact tracing to first determine what is the impact before we decide on who closes. Is that we would imagine, though, of course, everyone in that classroom would be sent home on isolation. And again, depends on the extent of that at each of the levels, elementary, middle, and high school. And then if the teacher is capable and willing to continue, because they're not, they may be positive, but they're not maybe too ill to continue teaching virtually, they could transition to that. Or we would, of course, be able to provide the opportunity for a substitute teacher, of which we have already secured additional ones to take over as they would for anyone who's sick, as they would be. We're going to have lots of question about communication explanation to students prior to school opening. Yes, the principals are all working on ways in which to get ready for some of our orientation programs. We are trying to see if we can bring in smaller groups at a time for kindergarten, for 6th grade, for 9th grade, so that they do understand, those that have not been in the buildings before. And then other public service message type of announcements that will be sent home prior to the start of school, that not only to the students but to all of you, so you understand what communication has been shared with your children and can help us with supporting in that. The issue of, again, question of if there's an option to let my child in person but have the choice to change back to online for any reason if they're not sick. I do believe I mentioned that earlier, and the answer is yes, but we are asking that you do that again at the marking period. This is not something that we can accomplish going back and forth with very little notice. It is very important that you understand that we do need time to be able to make those types of adjustments for individual students, as it may impact an entire classroom in a variety of ways. If you as a parent, question here about you want hybrid, so the hybrid option is not in place at this time, so that's not something that you can choose to set up. Again, we right now have all students attending K to 12 5 days a week, or if you can choose to have again your child on virtual learning if you choose to do so by the end of Wednesday. If you did not get the survey for any reason in the previous emails, I'm going to send up a reminder tomorrow morning as to ask you to complete it, and it will again include the link, so not to worry. Again, just one item back to the hybrid. All of the classrooms are going to be the same as if you were in a hybrid, with just a couple more kids, but still, again, socially distanced at all times, plus the barriers, plus the masks. So the hybrid, his main component difference would be in the high school in the hallways, where, again, the density would have more, but we do have, again, staggered bell schedules when kids are going to be released to reduce capacity there, and the types of directional changes of how to move from class to class that are being set up by Mr. Jans. Flexible at the moment, how can you demand parents? What I mean by the question about imperative that we remain flexible, what I mean by inflexibility is that someone else could determine that we are not able to complete something, and so our plans have to be able to transition in that flexibility. People's work situations are very important, and that's one of the reasons, again, why we understand the choices that are made are to help provide that for everybody. And if you have concerns about that, again, I encourage you to reach out, again, straight to me, or if it's a building issue, excuse me, straight to your building principal. Will students in virtual learning be getting live instruction, or will have to watch video posted after? Right now, the intention is that students in the virtual learning will be getting live instruction alongside their classmates that are in front of the teacher. That is why the period-by-period attendance is a mandate from the state, and that connection between student and teacher is in place for each day, each period. That's something we must require. And so that's going to be in place. Students in all learning, regardless of location right now, is going to follow normal, typical grading and evaluation procedures. There are no changes to any of those policies at this time. If you're not, question about if you're not sending our children to school, you don't fill out, if you are sending children to school, you do not need to fill out the form, correct? If your desire is to be on virtual in-home learning, you must fill out the form and send it to me. And again, I will follow up tomorrow with the community as a reminder. What will it look like in the classroom? The question regarding those that are on virtual. The classroom is going to be, I'll say, difficult to predict right now as we're continuing to work on what some of those practices are going to look like from our teachers. Mr. Choi has already done a number of demonstrations for our staff about possibilities, and the teachers are continuously working on a variety of ways in which students from home will be following along the students that are in front of the teacher. Some of that will also depend on, so how many are in front of you and how many are at home? So I can't answer specifically to what a teacher may choose to do, the same way I wouldn't be able to answer what would be going on in their classroom on a day-to-day basis under normal circumstances. So again, the main teacher will be running that for the students on their class rosters as of right now. There are some questions that are very specific to people that I'm not sure is worth sharing, but things, well, I don't want to tip people's scenarios, but I do want to be mindful of some of your privacy, so I don't necessarily want to read all of them. Enrichment reading classes. Yes, no, maybe, Mr. Felia?
Remedial reading.
Remedial reading, enrichment reading. Not certain yet. Again, types of enrichments and remedial, again, anything remedial will be in place. I don't have an answer yet on enrichment reading. Chorus in 7th grade right now is a class that students will attend, and Mr. Fullerton will have more specifics on the makeup of that class, where they're meeting, etc., in his plans. Students in music is going to be a very challenge that are on virtual. So again, there is no, there'll be less large groups involved in our bands, but the lesson groups will be created, and our coordinator of music is surely going to be challenged to figure out how to best get our teachers prepared for that. So I don't have an exact answer. It will be definitely instruction. It will not be none, and that was the question about music. You have more questions about online students be following the class live where the teacher is teaching? The answer is yes. As of today, yes. Yep, and the same question again. And again, yes, live conducting sessions. Question about hybrid, again, that comes up is the notion that why not hybrid and why all in? Again, the classroom setting itself is entirely similar between hybrid and all in under these conditions in our buildings. And again, we're fortunate to have the space to do that. So is there a difference between a hybrid classroom and an all-in classroom? Not if defined by social distancing barriers in place and masks in place. So there's no difference there. The significant difference in the secondary school would be the potential capacity in hallways. And knowing the significant unintended consequences of having our students away from the teachers for extended periods of time, and being that we can provide all three safety measures when only one is required to be in place for students to attend a building, we do believe that 5 days a week in front of our students is far superior to 2.5 or 2 to 2.5 days a week. And while we can, with infection rates being so low, that's why we talk about it today, we believe we should put the students in front of our staff as much as possible, knowing the real potential to have to shift away from all in person at some point. And if we learn during the course of time that we have concerns that were hard to meet, then we would surely shift to another plan. And we also know how hard hybrid is on the community in so many cases with worrying about childcare. And so we want to give every opportunity for our students, again, to be in front of our teachers, to build those connections and relationships and established foundational skills to help provide a better learning experience throughout the course of the year. During the spring, there was a very different starting point where students had been with us for almost 70% of the year, and teachers knew their students incredibly well. That we have nothing to do with now. Teachers are going to be with kids they've never met and vice versa. And so for those that can be in front of our teachers, we believe they should be, if we can do it in the safe way. And again, following all of the guidance and our committee meeting thoroughly to discuss the possibilities, having those all in place is a huge advantage in order to get all of our students in front of our teachers who wish to be. AIS is on hold for now, as a question that's on hold, because part of it is to determine what it is we're going to be doing with AIS. Because AIS may not be the same format as in the past as we evaluate what are the actual learning gaps that may be in place. And so I simply put it out there as the normal AIS starting points may be on hold. And in addition, because AIS often is associated with before or after school, we are not starting with before or after school programs at this time, as we begin to simply try to get everybody back into school first. If a student has to quarantine, how can they log on to virtual? Yes, we mentioned that before. that they would simply add on to their teacher's Google Meet and Classroom with those that are already on virtual. Again, we really have to beg you to not say, hey, we'll try it for a few days and then go right to virtual. That disrupts so much of the planning we put in place. I would simply ask that if you have such significant concerns that you have a conversation, you can call myself, you can call your building principal and discuss it. But at the moment, we're asking that every family at least make the commitment for the first marking period, because of so much of what the teachers are also trying to plan for your children as well. Another question about live teaching. Yes, there'll be live teaching. And so the answer is it will not be like the spring. It will be, again, period by period. In an elementary school, it would be also, in essence, broken out by period by blocks of time. And so you'd be following along throughout the course of the day. And it could be, next question is about how would that be structured online, is that, again, some of the strategies being used, we don't expect, and we know how people are concerned with how much screen time students may have to endure. And so we may end up showcasing a variety of, instructional strategies. Because just like they would in front of you, students are independently working. And possibly that independent work may not require the Chromebook for that time and allow students to put the screen down temporarily and work on materials in front of them. And with those materials, we would work on making sure there are ways in which you can get them, pick up or drop off throughout the course. And how we would do that and when we do that is going to be dependent, of course, on who needs it, not just what we need. We are preparing for the materials, but we know that the quantity will determine a lot of how we plan for distribution. Right now, all state tests are still on the table, not because I wish them to be, but because they're mandated. And so again, we're moving forward for the start of the school year under the auspices that we are simply business as usual when it comes to evaluations and grading. How will remote learning process be shared and how much time do we have to make a decision? The remote learning process is shared. It was in our original plan. It was in a bit of my previous slide and highlights, and it is now in its, I'll say, newer format pulled out. It is on the website near the link in which you signed on tonight. And again, the decision to go to remote is by the end of Wednesday, please. If you have a concern and that's not applicable to you somehow because you feel you have an extenuating circumstance, I simply ask you to call your building principal and have a conversation. Question about when will children, and in this case kindergarten children, know their teacher? The answer I mentioned earlier is that they may know their teacher, but things can change. Your teachers may change based on the response of the community and where students are going to be. So I mentioned earlier in the presentation that can be something to expect. I hope not, but I simply want to prepare you for that possibility. The question about rotating out, are the same kids rotating out every day? And how do we determine it? Those additional small group instructional spaces would be something that all students would rotate through, so your children would go through it only periodically. And it would simply be enough needed to make the rest of the class fit in the capacity for social distancing. Now, as parents choose to go with our virtual only option, then the chances are that these plans won't even be required. Our new ventilator systems installed in classrooms, again, we had all univentilator systems totally upgraded, refurbished, and in all classrooms, and all of our new areas in our common areas, all our new systems in our common areas have been, again, updated and cleaned and refreshed as well. Elementary students should be allowed to wash their hands as often as they like, and that will be part of our hand hygiene that will be described from before they arrive until each day that they walk out the door. It'll be, constant. Will the schedule look like? What will the schedule look like for virtual learning? Again, the virtual learning is going to follow a period-by-period schedule that will, in 6 to 12, easily resemble your normal schedule. That they will have the Google Classroom with the Google Meet code that they'll connect with their teacher each period every day. Curriculum. How do parents and students access curriculum and workbooks? That's a great question that we're going to work, as a matter of fact, conversation tomorrow with our directors and our principals on how to best develop the curriculum materials. In combination, of course, the teachers have been working on this, as Mr. Spence has a large series of curriculum writing projects that are designed to be more beneficial in a hybrid or virtual environment as well, knowing that there'd be students who may be in those situations. Question on indoor recess. What will it look like on the elementary level? Indoor recess is not going to look anything like outdoor recess, unfortunately. It would be in classrooms, gymnasium possibly, but again, with keeping students distance from one another. Hard to do. Still not certain what type of activities, as our physical education team continues to work on that. A question about why can't everybody go to 4 sections of students to reduce the amount. Again, we don't need it for every grade, and sometimes that's also a space issue where they don't actually have open classrooms in our buildings to add extra sections of classes. Question about consideration for amplifiers or microphones for teachers. That's a great question. None of the members of the teachers on the committees mentioned that, but we'll look into that carefully. I'm not, I understand that I won't have answers to every single question here, but we'll continue to add those to our list. Talked about remote learning. What will we do? If a class or student is asked to quarantine, they'll be doing virtual learning for the 2 weeks, yes. What resources, anxiety about return? The resources that we have, first of all, most importantly, are our people in terms of anxiety about returning to school. And again, the focus of the first few weeks is going to be all heavily laden with social emotional learning, not academic learning in the same degree, especially for our younger students here. We're looking into whether we can offer additional push-in programs like Argonauts. And right now, we do not think we're going to be able to handle Argonauts with the cohort nature that we have in place. Procedure about how to return to school at the end of the marking period will make it very simple. Your role as a parent would be to contact your building principal via email, phone call, and have that conversation. We will prompt you surely numerous times of when the time frames are coming so that it is not a surprise, and we're not going to make it so that it's impossible for you to do it because you missed by a deadline a day or something. That's not something we're looking to do. We're simply trying to accentuate the point that we need your cooperation in the planning piece to understand what we're working with in person versus what we're working with at home. And the constant potential of flipping back and forth makes that an impossible task for us to handle in an already huge undertaking. All curriculums in school and at home are intended to be the same. Again, you're following your teacher along at this time. And so once again, the process of switching from in-person to remote. This is not something that we're going to be able to handle if you want to do it only a part way through school. A few days or a few weeks. We're simply asking that you make the commitment to try for the quarter or the marking period. And if you have concerns, we'll ask you to reach out to your building principals to discuss those. Students who are sick or, again, at home, at this point, we may be able to put them on the distance learning for the day so that they keep up. So anyone who's out for the day or two while sick. Yes, to confirm once again, the survey for those who wish to have school from home only needs to be completed, again, only by those parents who wish to stay on virtual. If you wish to be in school, you have nothing else to do. A question about changing classes in the middle school. As we mentioned earlier, the 6th grade will be staying in their classes, but the 7th and 8th grade will be changing classes with staggered schedules. Already now a third reduction of the class of the hallways, with the 6th grade staying in their classrooms, and again staggering the departure and arrival to classes by the building principal. We do know that one of the biggest issues is going to be technology and capacity here, capacity at home. And someone asked a question, if we have to go to virtual due to quarantine, what if you experience Wi-Fi outage? The question is always a good one, because it's important to note that we're going to work with every family to deal with the difficulties that arise. We know that Wi-Fi will fail. It may fail for us, it may fail for you. And I don't have an answer as to how exactly we're going to work it out, because the scenario may be very different for each case. But I do know that we have a lot of confidence that we will simply work with you to make the best of it. A typical school schedule means 9-period day, for those that ask. 9-period day, the same as if you attended in person. That would be the same schedule that you will attend at home. The bell schedule, if I didn't mention it thoroughly earlier, at the 2 secondary schools, the principals are considering small, minor changes to the bell schedule to provide a little more time between classes for passing, to help us with that reduction of students in the hallways, and also possibly for our arrival and dismissal parts of the day, where there may be some extensions to the period 1 and period 9 to allow, again, for staggered arrival and staggered dismissal. But in the end, it's still going to be 9 typical periods of school, as if it were normal. All the virtual teachers as of today are the assigned classroom teachers for that question. Question again about how was social distance during recess, and the answer is very structured ways in which they'll be led by adults. So it will be organized, not free form. And our classes will be kept together so that the exposure is limited only, again, to that class. How is testing done for all virtual students? Is a great question on what platforms, what programs, what formats teachers are going to use for testing students. And I don't have specifics for you, as they're continuing to work on that, and we, again, still have a number of weeks before they determine which ways in which they're going to attend to their classes for instruction. But the good news is they are surely not alone in needing to do that and figure that out, as I've said to them on a number of occasions, where we have millions of students across the country, especially in states that are not in the same current position with infection rate as New York, that are going to be working on this. So we know there'll be a wealth of opportunities for the technology to be utilized. And again, that will come specifically from your classroom teacher. Are students carrying textbooks and backpacks? And the answer is very, very likely, well, definitely no, about heavy backpacks. It may be light backpacks with limited amounts of supplies. And that information, again, will be forthcoming from your building as they determine exactly, beyond your Chromebook, what should you carry to your class each day. Question about, again, if your child is at home because you have a precaution, you have a symptom, you have a worry, Can they join remotely for the day? As of today, the answer is yes. In the current structure, what we have going with us. If the student is quarantined and they're able to join the classes, then that counts as attendance, and that is the purpose of why all of our online virtual learning is following period by period attendance. So if they're in attendance, your attendance policies are able to be maintained, and your attendance themselves will be able to be also maintained for students who are unable to go back. Again, question about how do you get students back in person? The answer is, again, communication with your building principal via email, phone is all you need to do. Classes will not be recorded unless a teacher chooses to, for some reason, record a particular portion. But they, again, are going to be, in essence, stream live, or portions of classes, and how they determine that is still a work in progress. But you will surely have portions of each period where you will be live interaction with your teacher. If you have there's a question about homeschooling. Just to be clear, homeschooling is a choice by parents to sign your children out of school completely, and you take on the sole responsibility. We are not allowed to assist you, but we have to hold you accountable. If you have a homeschooling question, you can feel free to contact Mr. Tom Kenny, our Director of Guidance, who handles all of our homeschooling. Question, homework center be open to JFK? No, it will not. Small group discuss only for certain grades. Question about small, group instruction in K-6 for certain grades. Explain what a day for the grade will be. Only some students with a teacher or different teachers. So a day would be that, I'm going to use a round term, 80% of the class will be with their regular teacher, and then 20% of 3 classes would make up an extra section for, let's say, half the day, and get some specials and maybe the math lesson. And then they'd go back, and then a different 20% would go for the other part of the day possibly, and maybe do the ELA lesson that everyone's getting and a different set of specials. So they would be, again, very similar with, again, licensed teacher working in collaboration with the classroom teachers on that grade level. That is what we would describe as the worst case scenario if 100% of the students attended. Can you scroll down a little bit more for me there, Mr. Choi, please? There we go. For those that are choosing, question on online learning, and if they choose that, will they be given materials, tangible materials? Absolutely. What materials would be partly determined by the teacher's curricular choices, and we will make it available to you in a variety of ways. I can't describe which way yet because of the needs of how many we're going to have to determine. Once that's determined, lets me figure out how. Whether it's a drive-through pickup in your building circle with your building principals, or whether there's a different format, we're going to continue to work with you. But once we have those definitive numbers, we'll be able to determine how to best prepare the materials and then get them to you. I just answered the question about that overflow class, and also picking up items we mentioned. Again, the question, how will students and parents be notified of students' schedule for remote learning and by when? The answer is no different than your regular classroom. As I stated before, all virtual students will remain on their regular teacher's classroom roster and work with that teacher, and that's what we have literally going as a live stream at this time. You cannot choose in person and only send a few days a week. That is something we cannot sustain and offer to parents. Next question is, do classrooms have cameras in them? There are no cameras in any classrooms. All teachers and teaching assistants are going to be given their own Chromebook that can be used for virtual learning. that part would be the microphone piece in particular, but it isn't necessary to even have the camera, as teachers may choose to share their screen through Google Meet from their desktop, where they see everything exactly on the smartboard, similarly to how I described my presentation to you this evening. And that is one way to protect students' class confidentiality. Although there's no difference in the class's confidentiality in person versus live stream, or whether we are on all virtual or whether we are in hybrid. Those conditions all remaining in terms of student confidentiality. Our instructional planning subcommittee and our return to school committee did develop a new series of code of conduct measures, one of which will be approved at the next board meeting, in addition to other best practices for students and their families to note as part of the training as we return to school. I'm going to respectfully defer any questions about the winter months as something that I simply shouldn't answer now, because there can be, again, many changes, mostly in what we learn about how this is going to go in the first few weeks of school. So I don't want to speculate in the winter months. Andrew, can you scroll up a bit more, please? 4 or 5 more. How will students being educated in a different class to exceeding my... So anybody who needs to be part of any sort of additional small classroom group instruction, the teachers will inform you well in advance on what days of the week and what times of the day you'll be part of that. And again, that's if needed. Within about a week, I would guess, especially about a week from Wednesday, once we get the final numbers and determine who has chosen to do remote learning, our principals may be able to, will be able to surely reevaluate what needs they have in each of the buildings. And again, if you refer to the slide earlier about the grades in each building that currently require some do not at all. And again, they're using larger spaces. The library is not going to be visited. It's going to be some group's classroom at this point. But then we'll let you know how many grades and how many buildings require those small group instructional rooms, and then what those rotations might look like. If anybody has a Chromebook issue, I see a question here about Chromebook issues that were left behind. Absolutely reach out to Mr. Choi. Send him an email, please, choi@bethpage.ws, and he will make arrangements to make sure you have your Chromebook in hand. Okay. If we decide 100% at home remote learning, then those books the students need. Oh, we mentioned again earlier about books and how to get them. Will students playing band instruments have plexiglass barriers between each other for band classes? No, the answer is they probably won't have their barriers set up because they won't actually have a desk in front of them, but they will have 12 feet between themselves and any other student. Okay. Again, gym questions are that gym classes are going to be meant for outdoors as much as possible. And we're determining what types of activities will be conducive for wearing the masks and what would not. And we do know that it is important that if there are activities where there's a consistently heavy exertion, there are going to be more distances required between students of 12 feet rather than 6. Okay, keep going for me there. Trying to get to as many of these as possible. I know we're going to continue to make these part of our FAQ as well. Dealing with transportation and dismissal. Being handled, again, those dismissal plans are going to be posted tomorrow for your buildings, so keep a lookout for your specific building. Will drive-up be used for elementary school kids and children be escorted out by staff? I'm not certain about that question about in terms of the drop-off. There will be some staff available to lead students into the right places, yes. Anyone attending BOCES? Good question. All of the BOCES for the high school programs are also meeting in person, and their buses will be made available to them. I mentioned again staggered arrivals, and I said no, arrivals and dismissals are possible. And those details, again, will be highlighted to you in the plans tomorrow. And right now, it's a great question about will children be required to leave the building at dismissal will be the location that can wait for someone to pick them up if they don't qualify for bus service. I will say, first and foremost, that our discovery program will be in place for before and after care for the younger students. And for those that are waiting around, we will designate areas that principals will have members of staff available to monitor them for pickup. But of course, we do ask at all possible for as much cooperation as we do know the kids love to be at the buildings after school in all of the cases, but we are going to ask as many parents as possible to try to avoid that where we can. And there are more questions here regarding the drop-off specifics and pickup specifics that will be addressed in your building principals plan. Question about orientations. I mentioned earlier, yes, there'll be orientation plan for incoming kindergartners, incoming 6th graders, and incoming 9th graders, so the group that is new to each building. The principals are working on plans. We have a conversation tomorrow about what they might look like. That's a wonderful question about sports and being on the virtual plan. And that is a very complex question because if we have students that are opting for the virtual plan, we do know that any sports that are going to be played are surely less able to maintain our safety measures than any sports would be. So I'm not certain how that's going to look until we determine what sports are going to look like. But if you're part of the school and you're part of the team, then you'll be allowed to participate. I don't see a reason why not. Extra time for passing in the high school, where is it coming from? So I do believe, again, those middle school and high school bell schedules are being worked on, and it may have shortened each period by 2 minutes in order to distribute that throughout our passing periods. Something to that effect. Again, these are not finalized, as those two buildings also have to coordinate thoroughly to make sure that staff is in place. And those are possibly being adjusted as we determine bus arrival and departure times, and again, arrival and departure staggered times for each building. A tough question about our seniors and lunch is having campus that's open. And part of the reason we have open campus isn't because it's a great tradition, it's because we don't have the capacity that the way the building was built a long time ago. So right now, again, as of today, with always subject to change, the seniors will be able to leave campus to have lunch off campus. And I know that will be popular with some and very unpopular with others. And again, subject to change. Okay, returning to school. Let's we scroll down a little further, please. I mentioned before and after care. Again, the question about hybrid versus all-in is no significant difference at all in what's available in the classrooms. And it's again I urge you to get an opportunity to read your building principal's plans for the passing in the hallways, where again JFK has already been reduced by a third, which is almost what you would expect in a hybrid. And the high school would be reduced dramatically, again, with longer times for passing and staggered release times. But at this time, again, the full recommendation is that we will attempt K to 12 all in. There are a few other districts attempting it as well. The reason most are not is because they don't have the space that we have, that they have the luxury of smaller class sizes that we have as well. And so they don't believe that they can fulfill. For example, in our all-in plan at the high school, Mr. Jantz already has 4 or 5 of the periods where if all students 100% attended, no additional small group instruction place would be required. So once we determine how many students are choosing the remote option, that will allow us to figure out even further how much more of our safety measures can be put in place. I'm going to take this last question for tonight, as we've gone about 2 hours. What should parents do if they didn't get the district text message? And I hope the person who put that question is still watching. This is a key one that has been mentioned a number of times in some of my communications. The only way in which we can get in touch with you is if you as parents indicate how to do so in Infinite Campus Parent Portal. I don't have a way to input that information. I don't have a way to verify that information. So if you go into the Infinite Campus Parent Portal and you double check all of your contact information, your email address, your cell number, those contacts are updated nightly into our system to go with our secondary system called Blackboard Connect, which is what we're using now since the closing. It's a system that's always been used to make the robocalls, but now that I use to send you the emails, send you the text messages, as can the principals and other administrators. So please make sure that if you are having trouble receiving those, first and foremost, if you're not getting the emails, please check with your provider and your spam, because of course that goes out to over 3,800 email addresses at once. And secondly, to make sure that your information is accurate and up to date. As often there are numbers transposed accidentally or a character missing, for example. So I do greatly appreciate the intensity of the questions, because I know how important it is for all of you to feel that we are doing everything we can to be safe and provide an environment that's conducive to learning here at Bethpage. Once again, our committee of over 60 members in such a wide variety of areas has made all those considerations with constant communication through our PTA, through our parent survey, and feel that, again, because we can provide all 3 safety measures, where districts are only required to provide 1 to have some in-person, that we can accomplish this safely, successfully. And that will allow us to have a strong foundation moving into parts of the year that, by estimation of the experts, may not be able to sustain that type of environment. And so while we can, we believe we should at this stage. And so I understand that this is going to be the greatest challenge of not only my career, but of every educator and of every parent and student to navigate these incredibly difficult challenges. And it pains me that for the first time in my career, I know that no matter which decision is made, everyone will be disappointed, because ultimately it's not the way it was and that we hope it should be. So while we do try to keep things as simple when we can and keep them as close to normal as we can, we know that we have to make these significant compromises adjustments, and ready to move to other steps when others outside of Bethpage dictate those conditions to us. So once again, I thank you for your time this evening. I thank you for all that you do in supporting the Bethpage schools. I do want to thank our Board of Education, who tirelessly work on behalf of all of our kids to make sure they have the best of everything we can under these very tough circumstances. And I hope that, once again, if you have very specific personal child concerns, reach out to your building principals. Take some time to review the posted presentation from tonight that will be up before I leave the office this evening. And tomorrow, when we post our principal plans for their building specific items that are not conducive to my presentation, that you get a chance to review those. And if you have questions, reach out to them. So thank you, everybody. Please stay strong, Bethpage strong, and we'll see you those who wish to join us tomorrow for the same presentation or again on Wednesday. Thank you, and all. Be safe out there and have a good night.